Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs. The first pig loved to play and have fun. She would spend hours out in the fields making daisy chains and climbing trees. The second pig was very good looking. He liked to go down to the pond and look at his reflection all day. The third pig was extremely clever. He liked to stay in his bedroom reading books and doing sums. But sometimes the little pigs would forget to help Mummy and Daddy Pig with the chores, and this made them feel very cross. One day, Mummy Pig said, "I've had enough of you 3 lazy little pigs. This house is a terrible mess, and you 3 don't help at all. In fact, you make it 10 times worse. It's time you grew up and moved out. Then maybe I'll have a chance to make daisy chains down by the pond, and maybe even finish my book." The 3 little pigs were a bit sad that they were being turfed out. But, the third very clever little pig said, "If we all have our own houses, no one can make us do any chores." The other little pigs liked this idea, so they packed their bags with everything they would need out in the big wide world. Mummy Pig waved them off with her handkerchief. "Watch out for the big bad wolf," she cried after them. "What did she say?" said the first pig. "Wasn't listening," said the second pig. "Me neither," said the third pig. The 3 little pigs shrugged their shoulders and off they went. After a while, the 3 little pigs walked past a huge meadow full of wild flowers, and the first pig stopped to have a look. She was getting a bit bored of walking and wished she could go and play. Just then, a big red tractor with a trailer full of straw came bumping along down the road behind them. As the tractor came closer, it went over a huge bump and a bale of hay fell off the back. "That'll do," the first pig said, and hugged the other little pigs goodbye. She quickly made a sweet little house out of the straw. It was a bit of a rush job, and it wasn't very sturdy or strong, but it was cosy enough, and the first pig spent the rest of the day picking flowers and playing in the meadow. The second pig and third pig carried on down the road, and after a while they walked past a big, wide, lazy river and stopped for a drink. The second pig wished he could stay longer, and, as luck would have it, another big red tractor came bumping down the road, this time with a trailer full of sticks. As the tractor came closer, it went over a huge bump and a bundle of sticks fell off the back. "That'll do," the second pig said, and hugged the third pig goodbye. The second pig spent a little longer making his house, but only because he wanted it to be beautiful, not to make it sturdy or strong. When his house was finished, it looked absolutely lovely, with not a stick out of place. He spent the rest of the afternoon next to the river, admiring his gorgeous reflection. The third pig carried on down the road until he came to a lovely spot near to town, just a short walk from the library. He looked up and down the road, wishing for a tractor that something might fall off the back of. Soon enough, a tractor did come along, and wouldn't you know it, it went over a big bump and a lovely big pallet of bricks fell off the back. "That'll do," said the third pig, and got to work making his house. Now, the third pig was a bit of a smarty pants and decided to make the strongest, sturdiest house he could. He took all night building the house, and it had a smart front door and a nice big fireplace and a handsome chimney on the top. When he was finished, he closed the door and locked it behind him and sat down to do some sums. The 3 little pigs loved their houses, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, that's not quite true, because the big bad wolf had picked up the 3 little pigs' delicious scent and found himself outside the first pig's straw house in no time at all. The big bad wolf was an expert at eating piggies, and he knew just what to do. Little pig, let me come in." "Not by the hairs on my chinny chin chin, I will not let you in," replied the first pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," howled the big bad wolf. He took an enormous deep breath and, before he could blow it down, a gentle breeze came along and scattered the straw house in the wind, leaving the poor little pig trembling where it once stood. The big bad wolf put the first pig in his sack for later. The big bad wolf carried on down the road, following the yummy scent of the second pig. Soon enough, he came across the stick house. Little pig, let me come in," "Not by the hairs of my chinny chin chin, I will not let you in," replied the second pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," howled the big bad wolf. He took an enormous deep breath and blew as hard as he could. The stick house wibbled and wobbled and swayed, and before long came crashing to the ground, leaving the poor little pig trembling where it once stood. The big bad wolf put the second pig in his sack for later. The big bad wolf carried on down the road, following the scrumptious scent of the third pig. Soon enough, he came across the brick house. little pig, let me come in." "Not by the hairs on my chinny chin chin, I will not let you in," replied the third pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," howled the big bad wolf. He took an enormous deep breath and blew as hard as he could, but nothing happened. He took an even bigger, deeper breath and blew the hardest he had ever blown. The house didn't even quiver. The big bad wolf wasn't very happy about this. He was supposed to be an expert at eating piggies. It would be really embarrassing if this little piggy got away. He tied the sack full of the first and second pigs to a tree and looked all around the house for a way in. Spying the chimney, he climbed the drain pipe and crossed the roof. It was a bit of a tight squeeze and it was quite warm, but it would be worth it, he told himself. The big bad wolf sat on the edge of the chimney and jumped. The wolf fell down, down, down the chimney, right into the fireplace below. He jumped up, howling, and found that the very end of his long tail was on fire. The wolf ran out of the door and back down the road, and he never tried to eat another pig as long as he lived. The three little pigs all laughed and danced and hugged all night. From then on, they all lived in the strong, sturdy brick house and worked together to keep it clean and tidy. The very clever third pig used his great big brain to help them use their time wisely. The very beautiful second pig showed them how to make the house look beautiful. And the very playful first pig showed them how to have fun while they worked. And they really did all live happily ever after. The Three Billy Goats Gruff. Once upon a time, far away from here, in a little valley nestled between two hills, there were 3 goats. They were brothers, and everyone knew them as the Three Billy Goats Gruff. Their names were Little Billy Goat Gruff, Middle Billy Goat Gruff, and Big Billy Goat Gruff. They had a simple and happy life. They spent their days frolicking in the meadow, munching on the sweet green grass, and playing by the crystal clear river that separated the two sides of the valley. The valley was beautiful, and they were very happy there. But as time went by, they realised that they had a big problem. The sweet green grass that they loved so much was almost gone on their side of the valley. The goats had eaten nearly all of it, and their meadow was starting to look patchy and bare. One day, Little Billy Goat Gruff looked up from munching on his grassy breakfast, and he saw that the meadow across the river was filled with thick, juicy green grass. "Brothers," he said, "have you ever noticed how absolutely delicious that grass looks over there?" Middle Billy Goat Gruff said, "Wowzers, I've never seen such scrumptious-looking grass. But, little brother, there's one big problem. We have to cross the river, and we can't swim." "What about that?" said Little Billy Goat Gruff, pointing at a nearby wooden bridge. "No one crosses the bridge," said Big Billy Goat Gruff. "There is a troll under there, and he's big and mean, and he eats goats like us for breakfast." His brothers gasped. "And he's smelly too," Big Billy Goat Gruff added, and his brothers gasped again. Big Billy Goat Gruff was absolutely right. The troll was big, and he was mean, and he did eat goats for breakfast. His skin was green and warty, his teeth yellow and crooked, and his nose was spotty and snotty. He was grumpy and lumpy, and what he hated more than anything was the thought of anyone crossing over his bridge. "All I want is a bit of peace and quiet," the troll would say. "Is that so much to ask?" he just happened to think that goats were the most delicious thing in the whole wide world, and that made him extra dangerous. But the 3 Billy Goats Gruff were fast running out of food in their meadow, and they were starting to get rumbly tummies. They needed a plan. They put their heads together and they thought hard about what they could do.
"We could sail across,"
Little Billy Goat Gruff suggested.
"We don't have a boat."
Middle Billy Goat Gruff said.
"Could we try sneaking over the bridge at night?"
Little Billy Goat Gruff said.
"Our feet would make too much noise on the wooden planks,"
Middle Billy Goat Gruff replied.
"The troll would hear us with his great big ears and gobble us right up." "What if we built another bridge?"
Little Billy Goat Gruff said.
"We're goats," Big Billy Goat Gruff said. "We can't build anything." "Good point,"
Little Billy Goat Gruff said. They kept thinking until they came up with the perfect plan. The next day, Little Billy Goat Gruff trotted up to the bridge. His hooves made a trip-trap sound as he stepped onto the wooden planks. No sooner had he set his foot on the bridge, the troll jumped up from underneath it to block his path.
"Who's that trip-trapping over my bridge?"
roared the troll, his horrible voice echoing through the valley.
"Nothing to worry about,"
Little Billy Goat Gruff said as bravely as he could.
"It's only me, Little Billy Goat Gruff. I'm just popping over to the other side." "I don't think so. I'm gonna gobble you up,"
bellowed the troll, licking his lips.
"Well, you could,"
said Little Billy Goat Gruff.
"but I don't think I'd make a very good meal. I'm much too tiny."
The troll looked confused. He got confused quite a lot. Then the Little Billy Goat Gruff continued.
"Why don't you wait for my brother, Middle Billy Goat Gruff? He's much bigger and tastier than me."
The troll thought for a moment and then stepped aside, smiling.
"Very well," he said, "but hurry up and get off my bridge,"
he added with a snarl. And with that, Little Billy Goat Gruff scampered across the bridge and began to munch on the delicious green grass on the other side. Next, it was Middle Billy Goat Gruff's turn to cross the bridge. His hooves made a louder trip-trap sound as he stepped onto the wooden planks. Again, the troll appeared.
"Who's that trip-trapping over my bridge?"
roared the troll.
"It's only me, Middle Billy Goat Gruff. No big deal," said the goat in his medium-sized voice, trying to be brave. "I'm just popping over to the other side to join my brother." "I do not think so. I'm gonna gobble you up,"
bellowed the troll, showing his horrible yellow teeth.
"Well, you could,"
said Middle Billy Goat Gruff.
"but the thing is, I'm not that big, and I wouldn't be a very good meal, especially for someone as big and strong as you. Wait for my brother, Big Billy Goat Gruff. Now he would fill you up, that's for sure."
The troll licked his lips and stepped aside to let the goat pass.
"Very well," he said. "Now hurry up and get off my bridge."
Middle Billy Goat Gruff trotted across the bridge and joined his little brother on the other side and began munching through the lush, juicy grass. Finally, it was Big Billy Goat Gruff's turn to cross the bridge. His hooves made a very loud trip-trap sound as he stepped onto the wooden planks. The troll, expecting a big meal, jumped up immediately.
"Who's that trip-trapping over my bridge?"
roared the troll, his mouth watering.
"It's me, Big Billy Goat Gruff," said the goat in his biggest, deepest voice. "At last," said the troll. "I've been waiting for you, Big Billy Goat Gruff. You look very big and very delicious, and I simply can't wait to gobble you up."
The troll bared his horrible yellow teeth. Big Billy Goat Gruff was not scared of the troll. He had big, strong horns, and he was mighty brave. "Bring it on, you spotty, snotty, lumpy, grumpy beast," he said boldly. The troll was a bit taken aback. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, but he was also very hungry, and he decided to take Big Billy Goat Gruff on. The troll lunged at Big Billy Goat Gruff, but the big goat was ready. He lowered his head, pointed his horns at the troll, and charged. He butted into the troll with such enormous force that the troll was thrown backwards off the bridge and into the river, floating away downstream, never to be seen in the valley again. With the troll gone, Big Billy Goat Gruff skipped lightly across the bridge and joined his brothers in the lush green meadow. The three goats were over the moon to be back together again and to finally be in the beautiful green meadow, eating the luscious, scrumptious and plentiful grass. They spent the rest of their days happily grazing and frolicking in their new home. And with the troll finally gone, they could cross the bridge whenever they wanted without any fear. And they lived happily ever after. What about the troll, I hear you ask? Well, a lot of people don't know this, but he floated down the river, away from the valley and out to sea. After weeks of floating about, he eventually washed up on a desert island, a quiet and peaceful place with absolutely no one else around. It was paradise for the troll. He found that coconuts were even more delicious than goats, and he spent the rest of his days guarding his beautiful island home, which was easy because no one ever found it. He may even be there still. The Princess and the Dragon. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess named Betty. She lived in the highest tower of a scary castle on a rocky island in the middle of a stormy sea, all alone. Alone, that is, apart from a huge dragon who guarded the island day and night and never let another person set foot on it. Back on the mainland, the townspeople all agreed that someone should go and rescue her. Many brave people said they would go, but at the last minute there would always be some excuse. Darren's guinea pig was poorly and he needed to take it to the vet. Jonathan's dad needed some help fixing a door and it simply couldn't wait. Simon had a tummy ache. And so years went by and the princess remained on the island. You may wonder what she got up to for all of those years. Well, at first she was very sad and lonely. She would spend many long hours looking out of her window of the high tower in the scary castle on the rocky island in the stormy sea. Out of the window she could see the huge dragon. It was as big as a house, and it was green with purple spikes down its back. It had black beady eyes and a long snout. Its claws were as long and sharp as swords, and its teeth were like daggers. It had huge wings, bigger than a jumbo jet. Most frightening of all, it breathed huge, hot plumes of fire from its mouth, burning anything in its path to a crisp. Princess Betty would watch the dragon from her window, and it watched her right back. Sometimes she would lose sight of the dragon for a moment and think perhaps it had flown away. But then, suddenly, it would swoop past her window, almost close enough to touch, and she would run and jump under her covers in fright. As time went by, the princess began to grow bored in her tower, and she found out that with a hairpin and a lot of patience, she was able to pick the lock, and she could leave the high tower. She explored the scary castle and found that it wasn't actually that scary, it was just a bit dusty and cobwebby. After she cleaned it up a bit and opened some windows, it was much nicer. And after she painted some colourful pictures on the walls, it was positively cheerful. Next, Princess Betty decided she could try exploring the island, although there was still the obvious dragon problem. The dragon always seemed to be watching her, and whenever she tried to leave the castle, it would chase her back in. She tried disguising herself as a bush so it wouldn't see her, or rolling in stinky mud so it wouldn't smell her, but the dragon could not be fooled, and it got so bad that as soon as she opened the big wooden castle door, the dragon would rush towards her and she would slam it closed again. And so, there the princess remained, sad and lonely, with no hope of ever getting home. Meanwhile, the people on the mainland were starting to get a little impatient. The mayor decided that if everyone claimed to be too busy to rescue the princess, then he would have to choose someone to go, whether they wanted to or not. All the young, strong people in the town wrote their names down on scraps of paper and threw them into a big empty cooking pot. Everyone gathered in the town square for the lucky or unlucky person to be chosen. The big moment came, and the mayor of the town pulled the scrap of paper from the pot and called out the name. "Steve," the mayor said, and young Steve was nudged forward. He smiled and waved at the townspeople, but inside he was terrified. He couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag. How on earth was he going to take on the dragon? The townspeople helped to prepare him by loading food, armour and weapons onto a rowing boat, and they pushed poor trembling Steve out to sea. All the while, the princess continued to wait in her tower. One day, she was sitting at her window, as she usually did, and she was watching the dragon, who was laying on the lawn with its head on the ground, resting between its sharp claws. The dragon was lazily watching her too. The princess sighed. The dragon sighed too. The princess sighed again, even more dramatically. The dragon sighed too, puffing a little cloud of smoke out of its nostrils. Wait a minute, thought the princess. Could it be? She sat up straight, and the dragon lifted its head to look at her. She tilted her head to the side, and she couldn't believe it when the dragon did the same. Princess Betty stood up and ran down the stairs of the high tower, through the castle, and heaved open the big wooden door. The dragon came racing towards her, making the ground shake with every thunderous step. Instead of slamming the door like she usually did, she stood her ground and closed her eyes, hoping she was right and that she wasn't about to become the dragon's lunch. Then the thundering steps stopped, and all she could feel was the hot breath on her face. She opened one eye, and there was the dragon in front of her, almost close enough to touch, laying on the ground like a dog. Princess Betty couldn't believe it. She took one careful step forwards and reached out one hand to gently stroke the dragon's nose, right between its nostrils. The dragon's tail started thumping the ground like a ginormous, scaly dog. "You poor thing," Princess Betty said. "All this time I've been so afraid of you. But you've been just as lonely as I have." She walked along beside the dragon, her hand gently stroking its scaly side. She stopped by its front leg and said, "May I?" The dragon huffed a friendly little puff of smoke from its nostrils and seemed to try to lay down flatter on the ground to allow her to climb aboard. The dragon beat its enormous wings and up they flew into the sky. Round and round the castle they flew and in and out of the clouds. The princess had never felt so free. Just as they were about to land again on the rocky island, Princess Betty spied a man on the beach next to a smashed-up rowing boat destroyed by the stormy sea. "We must try to help," she said. They landed next to the man, and Princess Betty said, "Are you quite all right? What are you doing here?" The young man looked like he was trying very hard to be brave. "I am Steve," he said. "I am here to rescue you, Princess." The princess looked at the young man and then at the dragon and raised one eyebrow. "It looks very much like you are the one in need of rescue, Steve." Steve laughed, and the princess laughed, and the dragon puffed a little cloud of smoke out of its nostrils. "Hop on," the princess said, and the three of them flew back to the mainland, where the princess assured all the townspeople that Steve had indeed been extraordinarily brave in rescuing her. What of the end of our story? Well, Princess Betty and Steve became best friends, and then, without really meaning to, they fell in love. They were married in the castle, which was now full of laughter and joy, and the dragon stayed with them for the rest of their days. And they all lived happily ever after. This is the tale of Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, quite close to here actually, there was a wild and wonderful forest. The forest was full of friendly folk, but there were also some scary parts of the forest, with ferocious and sneaky beasts. One of these creatures was a wolf. He was big and he was bad, and he was always trying to gobble up the friendly folk. The friendly folk knew this, and they told stories to their children about the big bad wolf, about how he would try to trick them, how he was clever and ruthless, and he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Over the years, the friendly folk became wise to the wolf's sneaky tricks, and they weren't so easy for the wolf to trick anymore. And so the wolf went away to try to find a village full of people who weren't so clever. This made the friendly folk very happy, as the danger that prowled just beyond the tree line was no longer there. Slowly, the grown-ups started to let the children play deeper into the woods, or skip along the banks of the stream, or walk to the older cottages in the centre of the forest to deliver bread or letters. Anyway, back to Little Red Riding Hood. Remember her? One day, she was called into the kitchen by her mother. "Your grandmother isn't feeling well," she said. "I've baked a pie for her. Will you take it to Granny's cottage to cheer her up?" Red loved her granny, and she was so excited to go and see her that she did a little dance before rushing out of the door so fast she almost forgot the basket. Her mother gave her a big hug and said, "Watch out for the big bad wolf," and they both laughed, as this wasn't really a warning anymore, not like it used to be. It was just something people said. As Little Red Riding Hood skipped along the path, she admired the blossoms and whistled back to the songbirds singing in the trees. She loved the forest in spring. The smell of the wild garlic, the tap-tap-tapping of the woodpeckers. She felt the woods come alive around her, and she felt more at home than she did by the fire in her own little cottage. Quite suddenly, Red noticed that the birds had stopped singing. The air had a chill in it, and the blossoms even seemed to curl in on themselves, away from whatever threat was in the air. Red stopped and looked around, holding on more tightly to her basket. Suddenly, a deep voice spoke. "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood." Startled, she turned around and saw him. He was huge and grey, and he was standing up on his hind legs, so he was much taller than a man. He had sharp teeth and a cunning smile. "Good morning," she replied politely, though she could feel her heart hammering against her chest. "And where are you going on this fine day?" asked the wolf, leaning forward and showing her his toothy grin. "I'm going to Granny's cottage," Little Red Riding Hood said. "My grandmother isn't feeling well, and I'm bringing her a pie." The wolf's eyes gleamed and his mouth watered. "How kind of you," he said. "Do you know, there's a lovely patch of bluebells just over that ridge. I'm sure it would cheer her to have a bunch by her bed." What a kindly wolf, Red thought. Perhaps those silly children's tales are just a load of old rubbish. Red smiled and waved at the wolf as she set off to find the bluebells. The wolf chuckled to himself as he slunk on down the path towards Granny's cottage. Before long, Red was at the door of Granny's cottage with the basket in one hand and a generous bouquet of bluebells in the other. She tapped gently at the door and a strangely quiet voice said, "Come in, dear." Red let herself in and looked around. It was dark and dingy, and there was a peculiar chill inside the cottage. She could see her grandmother in bed in the corner. She had the covers pulled right up to her chin, and there was something strange about her face. "Come closer, dear. Come and sit by me," she called. Red thought to herself, "Oh dear, Grandmother must be worse than I thought. She never has all of the curtains closed, and she always has a fire crackling away in the hearth." Little Red Riding Hood had always been a practical sort of girl, so she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. "Don't worry about me, Granny," she called into the dark. "I'll get this place shipshape in no time." Red poured some water into a jug for the bluebells and set to sweeping the floor and starting the fire. She started to open the curtains when she heard a funny, muffled sort of sound coming from a broom cupboard. Red stopped and looked around, but Granny started coughing and said, "Come closer, dear. I'd like to look at you. It's been so long since you visited." Well, that was definitely strange. Red and the other children came to Granny's cottage to bake cookies and hear Granny's stories twice a week. Had the old woman bumped her head? Red brought the jug of bluebells over to the bed, thinking they would brighten her Granny's mood. As she got closer, she couldn't believe what strange effects this illness had had on the woman in the bed. "Oh, Grandmother," Red said, "what big ears you have." "All the better to hear you with, my dear," the figure in the bed replied. "And Grandmother, what big eyes you have," said Red. "All the better to see you with, my dear," the strange creature said. "And Grandmother, what big teeth you have," cried Red. "All the better to eat you with," roared the wolf, throwing off the covers and going to leap from the bed. Little Red Riding Hood was so shocked she didn't have a second to make a plan. She just used what she had in her hands. Quick as a flash, she lifted the bluebell jug in the air and smashed it down on the wolf's head, sending a spray of water, sharp shards of pottery, and 100 bluebells showering all over the place. The wolf was out cold on the floor. Just then, Red's real Granny came bursting from the broom cupboard in her nightie. Red and Granny hugged and then got to work tidying up the mess. They tied up the wolf and carried him down to the river, where they put him in Granny's old rowing boat and floated him away. The wolf was never seen again. Later, while Red and Granny finished the pie, they decided that seeing as the wolf problem was solved, there was no good reason to worry the other grown-ups in the forest. After all, they would never allow the children to play amongst the trees, skip along the stream, or walk to cottages deep in the forest anymore if they found out. It would stay their secret. And so, the children kept coming to Granny's cottage to hear her stories. Even when Red grew old and moved into the cottage herself, the children still come. And I always kept the secret. Well, until now, of course. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this magical story. If you want to come along on more of our adventures, make sure you subscribe to our channel. There's so much more to be discovered. You can start right now by clicking on our channel and picking your next favourite tale. There really is something for everyone, from daring heroes and mischievous creatures to magical lands and secret wonders. And remember, by subscribing, you'll be the first to know when a brand new story is ready to be enjoyed. Let's go.